Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Aquarium's Online Academy. My name is Luke, joining you again here, and we have an interesting program planned for our last program of the week today. We are going to be doing I almost said a squid dissection, because that's what we usually do, but this is perhaps even more exciting. We are going to do a fish dissection. Specifically, we're going to be dissecting a type of mackerel. So, this dissection is going to give you a very, very up close, very, very up close, so up close that it's actually inside, in fact, view of really how the fish's anatomy works. We're not going to go into all the deepest details, and I have to be honest with you, it's been a while since the last time I did a squid dissect, a fish dissect. See, I'm saying it again. It's been a while, as you can probably tell, since the last time I did a fish dissection. So I'm going to be relying a lot on some input from my colleagues behind the camera. We've got Stacy, who's going to be bringing up different pictures and images, and also probably giving me a few bits of guidance if I ever get confused, which has been known to happen. And also, we've got Talia, who's going to be taking questions on the computer. And if you want to ask any questions while I'm doing this dissection, you can. The number is right below me here, 562-286-1838. Again, that's 562-286-1838. And you can text us at that number anytime while we're here live, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, even if I'm deep in the dissection. And if you're watching this post facto and you have a question, you can email us at live@lbaop.org. So if you're watching this later on, you still want to ask us a question, you can send that, and we usually respond to that within a day or so. And now, before we begin the dissection, which, by the way, upfront warning, I should say, for those of you who may have watched our squid dissections before, squid dissections, they got nothing on fish dissections. So if you're at all queasy or anything, you've been warned. That being said, I just like to turn on my, my scientist brain when I do this, so I don't think about all the things that might normally bother me if I were more in my everyday sort of frame of mind. But if you kind of imagine yourself as like a doctor, you can get through dissections a lot more easily without sometimes some of the stuff that ends up, well, as you'll see, some things can be a little gross. So, before we get started on that, though, I want to talk a little bit about fish in general. And this is important because fish, we kind of lump them all together as, like they all have a lot in common, but actually fish are probably the most diverse group of vertebrate animals. Just like us, fish have backbones, but fish are the first kind of group of vertebrates that still exist, right? The earliest animals with backbones that lived were fish in the ocean. And so fish have been diversifying for hundreds of millions of years. And over the time that they've been doing that, fish have, developed all sorts of crazy, wildly different body shapes and plans of how they live their lives and behaviors and all these different adaptations. And their diversity is so great that, if you compare, say, this leopard shark here to this, one of these rockfish or sand bass that are kind of floating around here, or this Garibaldi over here, those animals have less in common with that shark in like a deep, genetic sense than you or I have with a cat or a dog or a cow or anything like that. You are more closely related to every other mammal than this fish here is to that shark that just swam by a minute ago. Even though sharks count as fish, because there's really two main big branches that we usually talk about in the fish world, right? There's the fish that have got bones, and one of those is what we're going to be dissecting today. And then there's the fish that don't have bones, and those are even more ancient than bony fish. So this shark here is a cartilaginous fish. They branched off the tree of life before bones were even invented. So every other animal that ever had bones after that is a descendant of some kind of bony fish. So that means that all the other vertebrates you know of are inside that tree that contains all the bony fish. So it's like you got your cartilaginous fish and your bony fish, right? And then some of the bony fish branch off and they start living on land, and they reptiles and amphibians and birds and mammals and all that stuff eventually, right? But then again, a lot of those bony animals just stayed in the ocean. So it's a really, really diverse group, moral of my story. And if we had a chart here to compare, that would be really, really interesting, but I don't think we can get to that in a half an hour. So what we're going to do instead is really just talk about the main things that are true of almost all bony fish, and also a lot of these things will be true of sharks as well, because since they've lived in the ocean, they've kept a lot of the same kind of body strategies. But without further ado, let's go over to our mackerel over here on my document camera, and you can start to get a look at the thing that we're going to be dissecting. So, this mackerel is taken actually from the food supply here. Oh, this poor guy lost some of his the webbing in his gills there. He just got the little bones. So, this is taken from the food supply that we use to feed things like sea lions and stuff here at the aquarium. This is sustainably caught seafood, locally caught as well. Generally, if you get your seafood locally here in California, you can be pretty confident that it's pretty sustainable. And this guy's actually suffered a little damage, which I wish I realized before I chose him here. But nonetheless, I think we can still get the idea. So first off, when you're looking at the exterior body of a fish, there's a few terms that'll be useful to you no matter what kind of fish almost that you're talking about, whether it's a shark, a bony fish like this one. And the first terms we'll learn along those lines are terms relating to the fins of the fish. So, every fin on a fish has a name. Now, we'll start with the most obvious one, the tail fin back here. This is actually called the caudal fin. The caudal fin. It's called that again on a mackerel, on a shark, doesn't matter what, it's called the caudal fin. Then on top, a fish will have what's called a dorsal fin. Now, there are fish that skip some of these fins, but almost all the fish that you're familiar with in an everyday way will have some or all of them, and they always have the same name. If a fish has got a fin on its back, it's always called the dorsal fin. Now, this fin here, which you can just barely see, maybe I can zoom in a little bit. I'm holding it on top of my finger here. Let me move that over. This is the pelvic fin. And this one's pretty easy to remember. I know it's a little hard to see that angle. Maybe I move him to the side. You can see me pull it out here. There we are, pelvic fin there. This is the pectoral. Stacy got me on most fundamental thing of exterior fish anatomy. So, I'm sorry, the pelvic fin is way back here, which I'll get to in a minute. This is the pectoral fin. Don't worry, I was going to realize in 30 seconds when I started to demonstrate where the pectorals are on the human body. So, this is the pectoral fin here, guys. I'm sorry, I'm not listening to my own words. And the way I always remember this, or at least I used to remember it this way, was, until I apparently forgot, was that we have pectoral muscles, right? Your arms are attached to your pectoral muscles on your chest. And so you can kind of think of the pectoral fins, it's kind of like the arms of the fish. And indeed, the bone structures of arms evolved from the same structures that the pectoral fins are part of. Now, if we move farther down the body, we have another fin that's got a name that will sound a little bit familiar. We have these two here. These are called pelvic fins. And in the mackerel, these are pretty dinky. In fact, I guess all this guy's fins are fairly small. Very stiff, though, because this is a ray-finned fish, so there's a lot of fine, tiny bones, right, that give the fin its structure. But they're also flexible. They can be flattened against the body, or they can be fanned out like this, which I'm blocking with my hand, but you can see me doing that there. So this pelvic fin corresponds, I know it's a little confusing because it's like, that looks like pretty high up on the fish, right? But it's got the same name as the pelvis that we've got, right? Now, if we move on farther down the body of our fish, we will find the anal fin, the last one on the bottom. And this fin is just like the dorsal fin on top, really just all about stability. There's a lot of fish that propel themselves through at least in part, through movements of their pelvic fins or their pectoral fins, or turn themselves and stuff using those fins. Though this guy, all his propulsion really comes from the tail fin here, and these are just used to basically turn. They're like those little things that fly out on a race car when it's making turns. But it depends really on the kind of fish you're talking about, because mostly when you talk about fish, you're thinking they push themselves with the tail, steer with the fins up front, so either these pectoral fins or some adjustments of the pelvic fins as well. But there's also fish that have modified and adapted these fins to totally different purposes. Like if you look, for example, at... You'll have to pardon me, I got my microphone stuck on a sea lion skull. Don't worry, it wasn't a real skull. All right, so, where were we? And now I've got fish on my ear. Oh, this is getting gross already. Now, where was I? So some fish, like say, for example, the triggerfish, have modified their top and bottom fins, those pelvic fins and that, actually I think it might be the anal fin actually in the triggerfish, and the dorsal fin to function as these sort of like fan-like flappy things that move them, that function mainly as both kind of stabilization, steering, and propulsion, and which they also kind of combine with the use of their tail. But in members of this particular family, other relatives of this fish being things like jacks and tunas and trevallies and stuff, generally all the propulsion is coming from that tail, and the rest of and the steering is all happening with the side fins. Now, Couple other things while we're looking at the outside of our fish's body. And this is another important thing to remember if you're comparing a bony fish to a shark. So where are the gills on this fish, right? We all probably know that fish breathe with gills. We breathe with lungs, which are a totally different organ, though they do the same thing, right? They extract oxygen from the medium in which we live. We live in the air, so we take oxygen out of the air. Fish live in the water, they get oxygen out of the water. But when you look at bony fish, right, you actually can't see the gills outright because they're all underneath this thing. There's a hard, bony door that the gills are actually hidden underneath. And if I open it up a little bit, you can start to see the gills. These are really pale, which is kind of surprising to me. Usually when I open these up, if I compare this to my other fish, the gills in that one are really red. And the reason the gills are usually red is because they really do work more or less the same way that lungs do in terms of how they get the oxygen out of the water, right? Your lungs work, you bring air, which has all kinds of gases in it, right, into your lungs, right? And then there's all these alveoli and things, all these, you remember all those weird looking things look like real red broccoli they teach you about in school. Some of you are older might know that already. There's all that stuff in your lungs, right, that exposes your blood's surface to the air, and then there's things in your blood that grab the O2, the oxygen molecules out of the air, right? So the fish's gills are doing the exact same thing, but you can't have a bag that you fill with water and then push all the water out. That's just too much energy. There's too much risk of getting stuff caught in there. So under the water, it's much more efficient and effective to get your respiration done using these fine filaments of the gills. So these all get filled up with blood, so they're normally red. The blood all got squeezed out of that one somehow. And then as that blood surface area is exposed to the water, they get dissolved oxygen from the water, and then it gets moved, that blood gets moved into the rest of the fish's body by the heart, which we'll find in a few minutes. But in the bony fish, again, this is all covered by the operculum, and it happens on both sides, of course. If we turn it over, we can open it up from the bottom, get a great view. If you're already grossed out, just stick around for a couple more minutes, because this is going to get worse. Just kidding. It's going to get more scientific, especially if I can remember what I'm doing. All right, so, and you can see there's several gills here, right? If we wanted to, it's a little hard when it hasn't been opened yet. We could actually count how many there are. Maybe we'll do that in a bit. It looks like 4 on each side, if I'm counting correctly. And later on, we'll learn that gills in many fish, including this one, can also serve additional purposes aside from respiration. They can also serve functions related to eating, which we will find out more about in a few minutes. But we'll just leave that there for now. Now, if you compared this to a shark, which we're a little low on time, so we won't look at one, but if you look at the side of a shark's head, right, you would see a bunch of slits here. In most sharks, it'd be 5, and a few sharks, it's 6 or 7. Oh, thank you, Stacy. We've got the great white up here for us. So in the shark, each individual set of gills has its own gill slit. But in bony fish, they are covered by the operculum. And most bony fish do have that operculum. There's a few, like eels, that don't. But our fish certainly does. And a few other things while we got this guy. Let's look inside of his mouth. Anything interesting in there? So one thing about the mackerel, in spite of his small size, is a predatory fish. And it's one of the great things about fish is it's like, what does the mackerel eat? Okay, well, the mackerel eats squid and fish that are smaller than it for the most part, and also some small plankton. And it's actually, I don't know if you probably can't hear it, but I can, and I can feel it. These teeth, these tiny little sharp teeth are actually biting into my glove a little bit, and my glove is sticking as I work here. Let me see if I can get some light down this thing so we can see what we're looking at. Is this going well at all? No, not really. Let's see what I can get here. Oh, well, it's great camera work. All right, so it's really hard to see, but there are multiple different sets of kind of toothed things in this fish's mouth. It's got a little silver tongue here. He is a silver-tongued fish. A singing voice like an angel. All right, so there's teeth in the front here, right? But then if you look farther back, you might, I'm not holding this very still, there's actually more teeth deeper down its throat, or tooth-like things anyway, that are actually attached to its gills. And we'll get a closer look at those in a little bit. But I think I've done about all I can with the outside of this fish. Beautiful scales there. So let's see about cutting it open. Now this part's going to be bloody, so steel yourselves, my friend. I practiced this just a few minutes ago, and, well, like I said, it was bloody. There's no other word for it. I guess that's how you describe bloody things. All right, here we go. So I'm going to find, to begin with, the one other orifice that you find on a fish is the opening here. It's called the cloaca. It's sort of an all-purpose orifice for reproduction, for getting rid of wastes, all that stuff. And I'm just going to cut right along the abdomen of the fish here. And I'm going to go all the way down along the bottom, up basically between the gills, kind of almost all the way to the end of the fish. Now you'll notice that this is still, I can't really get this very open. This is the fun part. So now I'm going to do another cut. I'm going to make sure I go all the way back here. Let me know if I'm if I'm blocking the view. I'll try to keep it as visible as I can. I'm going to make sure that I cut all the way to the back, because once you get past the body cavity here, you just have a bunch of meat, muscle back here beyond that point. So I can feel with my scissors that I've hit that point, gone as far back as I can. Now I'm going to start to lift the muscle and the skin tissue here, and I'm going to just start to cut back and try to get as much of the body cavity on this fish exposed as possible. Now this guy looks like he's still a little bit frozen, so some of the muscle's sticking, but that's okay. We'll sort of pick it away as we go. And I'd like to take this moment to thank this fish for being a fish, by the way. I always feel a little guilty when I do this, even though we're doing science. So, and as you can see, by the way, as I'm lifting, I don't know if you can see that, but you can see the fine, tiny ribs that, you know, if you're cooking fish and you don't really know what you're doing, you'll always end up with some of those in your food, right? But if you find somebody who really knows how to prepare fish, they'll manage to get all the ribs taken care of. And then, and as I actually didn't mean to leave those behind, but actually it's kind of cool that as I pull away, you can see them all there. I think I'm going to leave them and maybe just remove them one by one later. And now I'm just going to remove this piece of tissue. And now you can see all those internal organs. I'm going to remove this piece of tissue. I've taken it all the way up to basically the base of the operculum. I'm going to cut it off. I'm actually going to go around the bones on the pelvic fin here, and make sure I didn't take any organs with me. No, I didn't. It's just all muscle and skin. Cutting off the pectoral fin. Ta-da! So we've got a fairly decent view of the anatomy of our fish. And if I zoom in a little bit, I wonder if I turn off this light, if the color palette, actually it's a little bit easier to see in some ways. So you can see some of the contrast there a little bit. Now you'll notice this all looks very bloody and gruesome, right? It's very difficult, if you don't know what you're doing, to tell the different parts of the inside of any really animal's anatomy apart. But we're going to do our best here. And there's one more thing I'm going to do though before I start looking at those organs. Some of this stuff is still kind of in the way. So I'm going to remove the operculum as well. And when I take off the operculum, you will see that I'm exposing the gills underneath, and then we'll get a really good look at what those gills really look like. So I'm just going to cut off this whole section here. I'm cutting through scale and bone here, so it's a little bit tough, but it's very thin, like pretty much everything. All the hard parts in a fish are really always really skinny. Because think about it, if you're a fish, right, you don't need really thick bones because you're not supporting your body walking around on land. So it's not as important. Now I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to cut out one of these gills, because I want to show you what it can do. Remember how I said that in some animals, in some fish, the gills not only are used for breathing, but also for something involving something about how they eat. So a lot of animals in the ocean, right, have to filter their food. How much time I got left? Oh, lots of time. And so in many fish, the gills have the one part that's used for breathing, right? Like I said, this part would normally be red. But then if you open them up, they've also got these things that you can see there. If I bring them closer, or maybe I should bring them farther away, you can see that. It's like a comb, right? Those are called gill rakers. And gill rakers are a very interesting structure that several different kinds of fish have evolved independently of each other. You'll also see a form of gill rakers in certain sharks, like the basking shark and the whale shark. I'm going to cut another set off here. And basically what these do is, if this fish is like, oh, I can't find any fish or squid to eat today, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to eat some plankton. It can open these up. The others work so well. Do you only have gill rakers on the one? Did I made a mistake. See, I've just learned something. I thought there were going to be more gill rakers. So, but we all learn things here every day. So if you look at these, though, basically, in combination with the gills themselves, they operate as a kind of a net. So plankton get caught on these things, and as the fish moves through the water, you'll actually see, even on our exhibits, are some of our fish doing this. They open up, they swim around, and it looks like they're doing it for no reason. They got their mouth really wide open and their gills really spread out. And they're like going like, "Urgh." What they're doing when they do that is trying to catch plankton in that special net they've made out of their gills and gill rakers. And here you can see an example of that behavior in a basking shark, one of the very largest sharks, and a very easygoing shark, just swims around with its mouth wide open all the time, catching tiny little animals. We got some questions, by the way. What is the skin of fish made of? So that is a good question. So first off, there's a lot of different kinds of fish scales. So you guys are probably, most of you at home are probably guessing, well, it's made of scales, right? So there's lots and lots of different kinds of fish scales. There's also some fish that don't have scales, such as eels, but like our good friend, the California moray eel here. But in the case of our good friend, the mackerel here, we have what are called cycloid scales. And those scales are made out of basically calcium and salts and collagen, all things that you'd be familiar with in your own body, right? Just that they've been, the different the microscopic structures have been built in different ways to create different kinds of structures. And there's fish dust coming off my hands. Can you see that on camera? I can. All right. Anyway, so let's move on. So yeah, anyway, but if you want to know, so the stuff that's in the scales is actually a lot of the same kind of organic compounds and structures that you'd find in your own skin or in your own nails and stuff like that. It's just built in a different way at the molecular level, so you get a different outcome. Now I'm going to cut off all these ribs. Sorry that I'm kind of hiding what I'm doing here as I go. Let me try to make this more obvious. I'm cutting the ribs off so that we don't have to look at these organs through a kind of a cage, a rib cage. And a literal cage of ribs, yes. Though now I'm going to have to make sure I don't get stabbed because these are kind of pointy. And now we can start to see all these internal organs. Now, first off, if you were looking for the heart of a fish, where would you expect to find it? Seems like kind of a tough question, right? Because, and yes, I'm leaving this lovely image up behind me on the wall while I talk. So, like I said, you know what you signed up for. So, in our body, right, where's the heart? It's really close to the lungs. In fact, it's right between them, right? In the fish, the heart resides more or less right between and slightly behind the gills. And it has a couple of chambers. It's not quite as complicated as our heart, but it's also a little bit, the human heart is very self-contained, you know, it's all like, it's all in the whole, in all the mammals, it's like the heart's just this one kind of, this fish-shaped thing, right? But in fish, there's a couple of different chambers and a kind of a pump, or really it is a pump. This is the muscle that does the pumping there. Maybe a little bit, yeah. And again, I'm sorry that this isn't easier to see, but see how dark this is? Whenever you find the heart of an animal, right, you're going to, usually if you see a thing in an animal that's really, really dark, you're looking at either a liver or a heart. And I know this is the heart because, one thing, this is clearly muscle here, and then on top of it, there is a bag. And in the last one of these I worked with, I accidentally popped that bag and lots of blood came out. And that basically is the mechanism by which blood gets pumped into the gills, gets oxygenated, and then gets pumped out through the back here into the rest of the fish's body. And you can see there's different blood vessels and stuff. It's so dark. There's not a lot of contrast. I know you're just looking at a bunch of like reddish black for you guys, but let's see if we can get in a little closer. Maybe the camera can figure it out a little better. Not really. No, it's still the same. But anyway, so this is the muscle section of the heart. There's a tube here that leads into this bag over here. And like I said, if I pop it, it'll get real bloody. Now, let's look at some of the other organs. And you know what? I'm going to bring my other fish over right now because that one had some really big organs that were really easy to look at. I'm going to zoom out real quick here. Thank you, Stacy, for keeping me posted. And, what a beautiful picture we've created. Now, this other one is bigger, and he has some real big parts. So, see, I did the same thing. You know, I think I did a little cleaner on the, they're both pretty rough. All right, so, some other things, though. This one was interesting, because this one, and one thing that you find in a lot of fish is that they have really massive livers. And if you look at this fish, you've got this big double-lobed liver. It comes down both sides of its body. And you see something very similar to this in sharks. There's a couple reasons for this. One, you know, livers perform the same function in fish that they do in other animals, right? They help to process toxins and stuff out of the food you're digesting out of your blood, right? And two, this is part of the digestive process. And then two, in fish, the liver oftentimes also provides assistance with buoyancy and stuff like that. In particular, in some sharks, a huge percentage, like some sharks, like 30 or 40% of their body volume is liver, because the liver is a little lighter than water and helps them to be a little bit more buoyant. And the reason sharks need such a huge liver, much bigger even than the one we see in this mackerel here, is that sharks lack an organ that this mackerel, like most bony fish, does have. And we're going to discover that organ next. And that organ is one of my favorites. It's this silvery thing here. I'm pointing at it with the tip of my... You see how it seems like it's full of something? This is an airbag here. This is called the swim bladder. The swim bladder of a fish is the thing that a fish uses to control its own buoyancy. So you can see it's when I squeeze it, it's a little hard to see. Again, I'm sorry that everything's so red. This is why it's so much more fun if you do this, if you can do this, with your own fish. But actually, I think I just popped it. Yeah, I just did. See how it just went limp? There we go. No more swim bladder, right? I just popped it. If we go to this other one, oh, see, this one's still full. Move that into camera there. This one is still full. So the swim bladder is just like a balloon, basically. It's just a built-in balloon that the fish can inflate or deflate to control its own buoyancy. So that's how well it floats. So if you ever see a fish just be like, oh, I'm floating here, I'm totally still, not going up, not going down, they're using their swim bladder to do that. And they can increase or decrease the volume of that swim bladder, or the amount of air that they put into it, and also actually its volume by squeezing or not squeezing it, to control how they rise or sink in the water. And the crazy thing is, right, I mentioned that all the land animals evolved originally from fish. It was not the gills that evolved into our lungs. In land animals, the organ of the lung that eventually evolved in the lungs was the swim bladder. Basically, over time, as fish became more, we're trying to live more amphibious lifestyles, things like what mud skippers do today and so on, those sac-like parts of their body developed a lot of the same features that gills had. The capacity to have a lot of blood vessels in them to expose a lot of blood surface area to the air that was already inside that sac, right? And you can see how over millions and millions and millions and millions of years, a structure that was originally meant to help you control buoyancy, if you fill it with, with oxygen-eating, blood vessels and stuff, will suddenly be able to pull oxygen out of the air. And there's actually all sorts of weird ways and additional ways that other animals have figured out how to get oxygen, aside from just gills and lungs. But gills and lungs are the two main ones. A few other things. We have a digestive tract down here on the bottom. If you open this up, in fact, why not? Let's have some fun. That's not what I want. If we open this up, we may be able to see what this fish was eating recently. Let's give it a shot. This is going to be gross too. It's not too digested. Looks like this fish has been eating a lot of plankton. I'm not seeing. So, see all this goop? This lovely stuff here? This is semi-digested fish stomach contents. You ever watch all those, any of those, detective shows and stuff where they're like, well, let's find out what the last meal was. And that same concept here, right? And sometimes you open up one of these things' stomachs and it's like, oh, there's a piece of a squid in here, or there's a piece of a tiny fish. But if you just find a bunch of goo, yeah, this fish was eating a lot of plankton. The bigger one, we can try him too, actually, if we want to. Let's see here. Doesn't look like they've got much in their stomach, so I don't think these fish were too full at the time of their demise. Yeah, just more of the same. It's more white goop. We go farther up, maybe we'll find something less digested. Let's try this section here. And once you guys are done with this, you can all, I hope I've made everyone as nauseous as possible today. Oh, that's not what I wanted. And we're out of time. I'm going to go throw up now. I don't know about the rest of you. Anybody want to eat some fish? Yum. All right, and we're almost out of time, so I'm going to leave our last thing here as, of course, this is a vertebrate, right? And if we look along here, you can find there's something very hard. I could cut it out if I had the time. The backbone of this fish going all the way down. And one of the things that always gets me about looking at the spinal column of any vertebrate is, all right, let's get this off the screen. One of the things that gets me every time I look at the spinal column of any vertebrate is like, yeah, sure, they're different shapes and stuff, across all the different vertebrates, but it's kind of amazing to me how similar they all are, though. Like, yeah, some of them have big things sticking out of the top and stuff, or some of them have more like broad, bones coming out of the side. But the vertebrae, each one, the way the backbone's put together is very similar across every vertebrate you kind of look at, and it's like the kind of general principle is extremely consistent, which makes sense, right? That's why they call us vertebrates. And we could have done this all day. And as I've been doing this, like I said, every time I do this, I learn things. I learned some things as I was teaching. I hope I managed to teach you some things too. But now I've got all this new curiosity about things that I'm realizing now, like, I only kind of half understood one part of what was going on inside there. Now I want to go learn more and find out maybe some of those additional things. And there's lots of ways you can learn this stuff yourself. If you go online, you want to learn more about fish anatomy, there's many, many resources you can find to learn about this that don't involve actually having to look at the fish's real anatomy. Pictures are worth 1,000 dissected mackerel. So I hope everyone enjoyed my squid dissection. This is our last online academy class of this week. We'll be returning on Monday with more classes starting at 9 a.m. You can find the schedule for those on our website. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and a nice weekend. Bye-bye.